Ahshuwah Hawthorne, welcome to the podcast. Could you just briefly introduce yourself and what you're doing, and then tell us your story, especially in terms of ministry and missions?
Sure. Well, I'm Ahshuwah Hawthorne. I live in Portland, Oregon with my wife and kids. We have a large family. We just had number 8. So that's my splurge in life is let's have lots of kids and raise them well to the best of our ability and God's strength and help. I'm a missionary entrepreneur. I have over the years done lots of different random things from church planting to missions like support staff, admin things to tech things. And in recent years, I started an organization called Brilliance Labs. There was you could say a strategic church closure that I was a part of, and the leadership team and the congregation had a vision to see this like legacy church, formerly large church that had declined, and it was time for it to close, but to let that in John's gospel it talks about the seed going into the ground and dying, but not remaining alone, but bearing much fruit. And so we had a vision for the church to die, but to let it bear fruit and multiply impact. And so Brilliance Labs came out of that and basically is the steward of the resources from the closure of the church with the mission of seeing kingdom impact come to our city in Portland, Oregon, particularly in under-resourced communities and neglected spaces. We like funding the hard things, the uncool thing, the non-hipster things. And then recently in the last year, the board approved adding a global element to that. And so we write grants and we provide some training and consulting to basically help kingdom entrepreneurs and church planters and global kingdom workers that are trying to do new things. And so like I'm wearing this shirt that says we empower bright ideas with Bitcoin. And so that was this kind of new element that we added in where we realized, wow, there's a whole kind of blue ocean open opportunity in this space of leveraging the power of Bitcoin and its potential as a technology for global kingdom work and impact. And there's different things happening around the world in grassroots ways, but we just saw a real space and opportunity to try to add value and help the global mission enterprise and world understand Bitcoin, and also to fund and explore new projects using it that haven't yet been tried out. New ideas that we'll probably get most of them wrong, and but we're going to fail forward and run some tests and see where God blesses and brings fruit.
Can you give some examples of some of the projects and ministries that you've helped with in Portland, and then also maybe one or two that you're excited about around the world also?
Yeah, sure. So we've run, I think, 4 years of grants now. So it's everything from church planting, so guys that are launching new works in urban settings or kind of out in the urban sprawl, the hood of Portland, Oregon. So not like hipster Portlandia, but more like too much fentanyl on the streets, kind of like really broken neighborhoods. So we've funded some of those kind of church projects, other things around like vocational training for refugees. There's this great nonprofit cafe so there's this whole third wave coffee world that's really thriving in Portland. And so it's this great coffee shop called Jubilee Hall, and they do vocational training for refugees and new immigrants that are like English language is their second language, and they're struggling with vocational experience. And so they give them a top-notch third wave coffee like barista training introduction that would set them up to have a career in that industry. So I don't know. Those are a couple projects that
What do you mean when you talk about a kingdom entrepreneur? Does that just mean somebody who runs a business and they happen to be a Christian and they want to impact and be a good employer, or is it something different than that?
I think of Nehemiah. So he saw the wall and Jerusalem in ruins, but it had been in ruins for years, and most people walk by and they're like, "Oh, that's just how it is. It's just broken. It's just past glory. There's just nothing here now." And Nehemiah shows up and like, no, there could be something more. Like God could do something more. Like this is a problem. We can fix it. And he has an idea for a solution. And he has the courage and the passion to meet that need and to start something new and to go and gather people. Hey guys, let's work together. We can make this happen. Let's go. I'm going to go talk to this king and stand before the pagan king and like, come on, fund this thing. And so it's kind of like that. It's someone that sees something, sees a space, has a wild idea. And it's not just how I can build a business, but it's how I can have a kingdom impact. And sometimes it's for profit, and we're a nonprofit, so there's some restrictions around funding for profits. But we try to find creative ways to empower kingdom people that have new ideas. So far, a lot of it has been more in the faith-based church space, nonprofit space, or more grassroots kind of community impact. One current idea we're building is these missional grants. So the idea is we give matching grants to churches, and then we give them kind of an already prepared missional grant model for them to give funding to church members to say, hey, do something radical to reach the lost this summer. So Portland's one of those climates where everyone just comes out in the summer and they go hide in the winter. And so, hey, let's give like nano grants, maybe $200, $500 to church members that have an idea to reach their neighbors or their community or meet a need. And then we help kind of give a vision to the churches for how to do that. And we do match funding. So it's like, hey, this is a budget neutral way that you can empower your congregation to reach the lost within their own like circles of influence.
So it's not just that you are handing out money to people. There's also this element of coaching and of giving them some wisdom. Christians sometimes don't see much of an overlap between their financial world, their business world, their vocational world, and their faith. How do you help and coach people in terms of how to integrate these things?
Yeah. So I don't think I've figured that out. I know in my life, having been supported by churches and individuals and lived by faith for over a decade now. I've had to learn creative ways to have side hustles, to invest well and wisely, find arbitrage opportunities, find market inefficiencies, and put in the education on that side for myself so that I see opportunities. And so one expression within ministry is like, how do you build a model that isn't the standard, okay, you get bankrolled by like some large churches and you go parachute into a spot and you got like 3 years and you got to start your church and get it self-sustainable. And a successful church plant is one that can get self-funded within 3 to 5 years, where that model tends to create an artificial timeline and almost like deadline where either I get self-sufficient by this time or it's a failure and I have to pack up and go home. Right. Where instead, if you have more of a long-term self-sustainable model where, let's say, the church planter or the missionary is also an entrepreneur and they go start a small business in the community, or they're a tradesman, or they bring in some kind of other of their own income source that they've developed. Now they have longevity. Now they can, when going gets rough in a community, they don't have to like pull the plug and head home. They can be like, no, I can I can take it a slow, deliberate, more embedded, incarnational model that trusts God for the fruit in His timing. Right. So that's one way where we like to encourage people towards. Not like a bivocational, like, oh yeah, I got to work at Starbucks, I can pay the bills, but I'm really this, and I really want to be full-time at the church. That's fine and great, but I think a co-vocational model where actually the pastor is free to serve the church, but also have a little bit of self-sustainability, so he's not just totally dependent on it, and is able also then to have marketplace relationships. Where right. I mean, you and I have been in full-time ministry, and you can get really busy with just church people and church business.
So I'm sure there's plenty of needs in Portland, all kinds of opportunities, all kinds of things that you could hand money to. Why and how did you also broaden to think in terms of global missions also? And why are you excited about that?
Well, so that was actually kind of where my heart and focus was before Brilliance Labs. So I served with a mission organization, started in 2010, focused on disciple making and global like frontier mission work. We worked with refugee communities, did some we call like diaspora missions to people on the move, people in migration. And then I've served in mobilizing churches in that area as well. And so I've always had a heart for that. But then it's kind of like one foot in the local church, and where I'm local is Portland, and then like one foot like out and abroad and looking out. And so I've never quite fit. I've always been too much of a local church guy for the missions world, because some of them are kind of like, yeah, the church doesn't get it, and we're the real pioneers. And I'm like, guys, actually, it's God's church. And no, the church is the steward of His mission. So I'm all about a church based and the church being the foundation of global mission work. But then in the local church, I'm like, guys, come on, like God's doing some awesome stuff globally, and it's not just about your bottom line and your butts in the seat, and churches can get really insular sometimes and not look outwards, or they outsource global mission to their outsourced missionaries, right? That they fund, and like, we've done our job, we put in our percentage, right. And then they're still just hunkered down. And so I've never quite fit in either of the worlds, but I've tried to find not a balance, but a tension.
Someone might say, that's all well and good. Love the idea of funding needs, funding missions overseas. Why do you need Bitcoin to do this? What does it have to do with anything?
That's a good question. So I don't think anyone needs Bitcoin until they do, right? Like, I mean, especially in the West, where you can say, well, the dollar works great for a lot of things. But there are certainly situations like, I mean, you think about Afghanistan, and if you were in Afghanistan when the U.S. pulls out and botches that, and then the Taliban comes back into town, like, if your money's in the bank, well, you don't have access to it anymore, and if your money is in your mattress, that's also not very safe, because the guys have guns, and so that can be hard. Maybe you have to evacuate, and you can't quite take the cash across the border because you're getting searched, or you can't take everything with you. So having a digital currency that can be traded on the internet, that your keys can be memorized, that isn't dependent on accessing banking infrastructure, or a certain country's currency that might be viewed outside of that country out as like, what is this? We don't whatever this Afghani currency is, we don't take that here. Okay. So when you do need it, it can be the difference between life and death, or like poverty and starting with nothing, or taking your all the fruit of your labor with you. So hopefully that kind of answers. I don't want to oversell it, but also when it's needed, it is needed.
So in the Western world, in America, when you talk about Bitcoin, people aren't usually thinking well, I don't have a bank, or at least most of the people that we run across with. There are a lot of people in America that don't have banking. But the circles you're running in, churches, you're in an urban area, there's a lot of banking and financial infrastructure. People have debit cards. What might Americans and Westerners, especially ones who are more financially literate and connected, what might they be missing about Bitcoin and what makes it valuable and important? Because they're not thinking, well, I can't use dollars or I can't get a bank account.
Yeah, well, I think of two different audiences, and I think the rich dad, poor dad kind of model is helpful to think about this, where the majority of us, right, that had the quote unquote poor dad, where you learn, get a good education, find a good job, and you're going to work and you're going to earn your money from the fruits of your labor. And you're going to put a little bit away to retirement, and you've won the rat race if you have enough in retirement by the time you hit 60 or 65. Congratulations. Now you can, you're not like this heavy burden on your kids or on society. And so that's the rat race model. And then and I would say for that person that's kind of just thinking that way about money, it's like, do you really are you content with that? Is that really kind of, is that working for you? And I would argue that it really doesn't work for most people. And if you have access to a long-term retirement asset that is in a process of being monetized from absolutely nothing, right? Just like a internet digital collectible, to now our country has a strategic Bitcoin reserve, and there's like mega kind of global powers like positioning themselves for how to use the Bitcoin network as for global like financial dominance. Like there's these real like significant things happening, and so that monetization process of going from zero to like an essential global monetary asset that competes with, let's say, gold, for example. The returns on that historically over the last 10 plus years have been above 50% compounding, and it's volatile. But if you view it as this long-term retirement asset or even generational wealth asset, your little like IRA that you're so stoked on, when you actually look at what true inflation is, you're like, all it is keeping up with inflation. All it is just storing my value, all the while like exposing it to global risk. And so you hope your retirement hits not in 2008 and potentially not in 2025, right? Or whenever the big drops are. So for that person, I'd say this is a path out of the rat race, and it's worth looking into. Or as the Satoshi says, maybe you should get some. It might catch on.
Right. So you're working in Portland often with ministries and churches that are in struggling areas, a lot of suffering, a lot of need. Presumably these ministries don't have tons of extra cash sloshing around every single month. They might say to you, well, that's an interesting idea, but how can Bitcoin help us? It's so volatile. What is the selling point to a ministry or to a church in America for Bitcoin?
Yeah, well, you have at least three that come to mind. So churches are funded with donations, so are a lot of these ministries, and there's this kind of economic principle, and it's this idea that the closer you are to the money printer and the newer money that you get that flows into the economy, the more you benefit from it. So in recent kind of wealth accumulation that happens in New York, in the financial district, and a lot of the financial world has happened in the Silicon Valley area with all the venture capital, and it happens in real estate through debt, and And so that's where all this money flows in, and then it trickles through the economy. Mm-hmm. Now, where do churches and ministries sit in that trickle process, right?
Pretty far downhill.
Yeah, you're basically at the end. Like you're for a lot of cases, you stand behind the tax man, or maybe in front of the tax man if you're lucky, to get what do people have extra to give, and so in an economy, you're going to most face the consequences of inflation when people's budgets get tight. The support of the churches and the ministries are the ones that are going to get cut first, so they can buy eggs and provide for their needs. And so, for a church, I would say like, what if there's a new monetary asset and quote unquote money printer, a source of wealth that's building in this parallel economy. And you can get cutsies right in line before the central bankers and the venture capitalists, and go right in line and just like hold out your cup and benefit from the monetization of this new global reserve asset. And if you could do that, right, why wouldn't you?
Right.
And so that little pass, you get this little orange. Kind of like Trump has his gold card, right? You get a little orange card, and it lets you go right in the front of the line and benefit from the monetization of this new global monetary technology. And all you have to do is, and comes to the next kind of use case, or how you tap into this, is you let your donors know, hey, we're willing to accept this new digital asset, and we're willing to hold it as a savings technology, and as a protection against the debasement of our currency, of all the craziness of what might happen in the world with global economics. Also, if you live in a place like my Canadian neighbors, I'm talking to you, where like if you say something politically incorrect, you might get unbanked.
Right.
They might be like, you know what? We actually don't trust you with your money anymore because you said this politically incorrect thing. If that's a risk that you live under, and your church might not make payroll because last Sunday your pastor said something that's cancelable,
right?
What can you turn to? Well, actually, there is a whole separate parallel like money system that if you have some hedging, and if you've put a little bit of your money there, you can pay your pastor next month without asking permission of the banks.
Right.
So letting your donors know, hey, we accept this, and we're actually going to set it aside to protect us from some of the risks that are out there. And then one other use case, and this goes back to the global piece, is like in the States, or in Canada with the West, maybe we wonder, maybe in Europe, we hear some pretty gnarly stories recently about like freedom of speech issues where, okay, yes, let's have a separate little nest egg outside of the banking system. That makes sense. But globally, getting missions funding into certain parts of the world, which are actually the parts of the world that the gospel most needs to go to and are like the last remaining places, those places don't want you to bring the gospel, and they don't want you to fund gospel work. And so you got to find creative ways to get that funding there. And Bitcoin is not like it fixes everything and it's the one-stop shop, and now you could just be Bitcoin only and we'll get it anywhere in the world. It's not that, but it's like one tool in the toolbox. It's kind of like a duct tape that it solves problems that other things can't solve. And it's like, okay, when this is really hard and all the doors are closed, hey, you know what? There's still Bitcoin network operating in that place.
Right.
Like gnarliest places, like you name it, the Bitcoin network operates there.
Right.
And so if you can find a buyer of Bitcoin in that currency, you can get like liquid value that you can spend in that jurisdiction.
Right. And a lot of people don't realize that cell phones and smartphones are far more widespread around the world than bank accounts.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And Bitcoin can operate. It can operate on a flip phone.
Right.
Like there's a whole
text messaging.
Over text messaging, you can send and receive Bitcoin.
Okay, so going back a little bit to kind of some of the work you've done with talking to ministries and churches about protecting themselves from inflation over the long term. Churches might say, well, we can't fully go into this and we can't just sit on it forever. Mm-hmm. Bitcoiners tend to get really excited about saving for the long term. The whole meme in the Bitcoin world is that you never, ever, ever sell it. You just hang on to it forever, and maybe you do some crazy things later with it where you use it as collateral for loans. That kind of sounds pretty crazy to a lot of churches and a lot of ministries because they're not there to just accumulate wealth, and they're not there to become super rich. They're there to do ministry. You've done some work thinking through how to help a church strategically plan for using Bitcoin. Could you speak to that briefly in terms of how to allocate it, how to use it for ministry work and projects? What might that look like if you're not going to do nothing, but you're also not going to just sit on it forever and ever and ever and never ever touch it?
Yeah. I agree that for a church, and I would even argue for an individual, just sitting on your Bitcoin is, or you're a big whatever, cash in a bank account. That's bad stewardship. Like there is, we've been entrusted with the money that belonged to God's people, and they entrust it to these ministries and churches to see kingdom impact, to see God's purposes done in the world, but then also to see that impact last for generations, to not just, we were bad stewards. So I think about like a church building, right? So you're going to save, you're going to invest, you're going to get this church building. You want it to be a beacon of light in your community. You want to be able to meet needs. You want to be able to teach your people there. You're going to use it for hopefully generations, right? Well, not if you let deferred maintenance grow, right? So if you have a building, you need to save money for the new roof. You got to think, we got to redo this parking lot in 20 years or whatever it is, right? If you want to think generationally, you have to be saving. You have to be putting away resources so that when the need comes up, you're ready for it. It's bad stewardship if you're not putting away those funds to have future impact or be able to maintain the resources and impact you already have. So given that, you're going to be saving in something. And so I would argue, right? So if it's long-term, then the volatility is less of an issue. If it's short to midterm, it is an issue. But there's some really amazing historical charts you can look at where you can compare like the performance of the stock market, the S&P, and it's all its volatility, but it's going up. Yeah, I don't know, 12%. It's keeping up at least with in inflation and then, but you can compare that and you say, well, Bitcoin, it's done really well, but it's so volatile and should a church be sitting through a 80% correction on a fund that's an emergency fund for them, or a building fund, or it's the roof repair fund? Well, no, they probably shouldn't. I don't know. Like I'm if that was all they had, I would. That feels
it's
unwise.
Also bad stewardship, yeah.
Yeah. Where we can't fix the roof this year. Or because it's the bear market, you know how that is, right? But in comparison to the S&P, which also can be really, really volatile, so most churches will be like, well, we're going to put it in a savings account where it's not volatile. But then you're exposing yourself to a guaranteed loss, especially like, let's say it's building materials. Like, holy cow, I priced a new roof 1 year, and I think after like pre-COVID, and then 4 years later post-COVID, I'm like, how did roofs get twice as expensive in 4 years? This is ridiculous.
Right.
And so if you have like a 98% cash reserve or like basic savings account kind of returns, and you put 2% in a highly volatile but highly upwards
volatile in the right direction
asset, and you say, what is the volatility of my 2% Bitcoin, 99 or 98% cash portfolio versus my stock market portfolio? Well, what you find is that this portfolio is way less volatile, right? Because cash is not, it just slowly goes up with your savings account,
right.
And then prices slowly go up or fast, depending on. But then Bitcoin is just radical.
Right.
That actually, the return of this portfolio is better than your stock market return while taking on significantly less risk of volatility. And so that's one illustration of like, hey guys, do the homework and be willing to put a little bit into this, and that I think give that 4 years and you'll be pleasantly surprised.
Right. Yeah. So one of the major subplots of the New Testament that is easy to miss, but when you notice it, you see it's all over the place, is Paul's collection of money to send to Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the Apostle Paul, who is himself Jewish, the Pharisee of Pharisees, as he says, becomes a missionary to the Gentiles, to the Greeks and the Romans. And he, in a lot of his letters and in the book of Acts, a big chunk of the book of Acts is about him going and getting money from them, taking offerings to send them to the original Christians back in Jerusalem, who are poor and persecuted and suffering. And the governing authorities there, the religious authorities, don't want them to be paid, don't want them to survive, want to crush them. Paul used to try to crush them. So you see in the New Testament this global kind of collection of money to send from the haves to the have-nots. But then you also, in 2 Corinthians, have a smaller version of it, where on the Greek peninsula, Paul's writing a letter to the Corinthians who are themselves materially wealthy and very spiritually immature and foolish. And Paul is saying, hey, your neighbors to the north, who are your rivals traditionally, culturally and politically, the Macedonians, are very poor materially, but they're very spiritually mature and joyful, even in the midst of their suffering. And so Paul tells the Corinthians, and he's a little bit shaming them a little bit, and he's saying, you guys need to get this money together to send to Jerusalem, but you also need to be thinking about your neighbors to the north that you have traditionally not liked very much, because they are very wealthy in spiritual riches, but very poor in material riches. You have material riches, but not the spiritual riches, and you need to learn from them and need to support them and help them. Is there a sense in which Christians in the West who have things, even Bitcoiners who have things, is there a sense in which they, like Paul, should be considering these people and these churches around the world who have so much less, but in many ways are more spiritually mature than we are? How does Bitcoin fit into something like that?
Yeah, so I would say, so there is absolutely within Bitcoiner culture, and to that audience, I would challenge them to say, hey, your low time preference and your like future orientation is awesome. But, and for the Christians, I would say you need to be aware of that, the idol of treating money as a fortress of protection.
Right.
And you should set some goals and targets so that you say, hey, when Bitcoin reaches this, when my stack reaches this, I'm going to start deploying it for kingdom impact. And something else about, I think, our hearts and generosity is that we never know whether money has an idolatrous control on our heart until we attempt some radical giving.
Right.
Right. I can kind of work my budget and be like, oh yeah, okay, I can give my X amount of percentage to my church and I can do these things. And I'm like, I'm fulfilling the good Christian responsibility, but I'm making it work and I can still navigate my budget and my different things. And then like there's an opportunity and you're like, oh shoot, here's this person that maybe it's a college friend it's a dear friend you've grown up with and know well, and God's calling him to go overseas. And it's like, what an opportunity that I can have radical generosity. Or you hear about this need and you're like, okay, are we going to dig deep to give? And to actually step into the sacrificial giving as a Bitcoiner, you find out, you're like, oh, this is harder than I thought. I really don't want to do this.
Right.
And I would just challenge myself and others, like, if radical giving hasn't been a part of your story or experience, try it and see where maybe there's some idolatry in your heart, and or maybe there's not, and maybe you find a new joy. You're like, wow, I have the gift of giving, and it's just like, this is amazing. Right. And then, wow, God just provided out of the blue in a new way. Whoa, I should try this again. Like, there's some neat little faith journeys I think God might want to put us on in the area of giving. And with Bitcoiners, we're talking about this on this trip. Like, he's going to be raising up patrons to the glory of God, of the future generations of like significantly wealthy people, that we're going to start having to figure out how to live with as biblically generous people.
Right.
And there's new temptations and challenges.
Right.
That come with that wealth.
Right. And there is certainly good reason to be apprehensive or suspicious of myself when I come across wealth, because, like Scripture says, many people tend to fall into the love of money. It leads them to all kinds of sin and snares. Mm-hmm. Jesus, in one of his parables, talks about how the deceitfulness of riches can lead people aside. Mm-hmm. There are real dangers there. But at the same time, the Bible has this really wonderful joy in the things of this world, and there's an encouragement for Christians to not run away from the world and mm-hmm. not escape from the world, but to enjoy it and to mm-hmm. enjoy even wealth. So, like at the end of 1 Timothy, Paul is telling Timothy, hey, in Ephesus, here's what you should be teaching the rich Christians mm-hmm. in your church. He simultaneously says, teach them to be generous and sacrificial so that they might learn about wealth that really and truly lasts. Mm-hmm. But Paul's not saying there should be no rich Christians. He assumes mm-hmm. that there's going to be rich Christians, and he says that God gives us wealth to enjoy it.
Paul had patrons.
Right, and Jesus had patrons.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I'm reading Joe Rigney's Things of Earth book. That's kind of his, I think Doug Wilson described it as like Christian hedonism, but with cigars and whiskey.
Right.
And that's just a metaphoric way to describe it. But really, it's about how do we use creation to the glory of God and not just view it as a competitor. Right. So if you really, and I'm kind of, this is my own personal cleansing out of perhaps some over-spiritualization in my early days, where you view, right, God's gifts as his competitors and as potential idols. And so you're always needing to like think about like a wartime lifestyle.
Right, I'm suspicious of the world.
You're suspicious of the world. You're suspicious of wealth. You even kind of view inherent virtue in like a poverty mindset. And I remember even as a young single Bible college student, like, how can I love a wife and God at the same time? And
right.
and you're trying to process through these things. And Rigney just does a tremendously wonderful job of removing the guilt that comes from over-spiritualization and being like, no, like God loves matter.
Right.
He created the physical body and physical things, and they are not simply competitors.
Right.
They are actually conduits, and there are my physical body and these physical things are the ways that I honor God.
Right. Right. At the center of Christianity is the incarnation.
Yes.
And that Jesus didn't temporarily become human, but that he is now human forever. He remains human. He's in a human body.
Yeah. And there's a whole lot of like neo-Gnosticism, I think, that can grow. Like in my early Christian life, I loved A.W. Tozer and Pursuit of God, and I was really into kind of that, like, we're going to go hard after Jesus and really pursue him. And I was did the audiobook of this, it's a biography on A.W. Tozer, and there was this quote that just hit so hard and struck me. I'm like, Lord, I don't want to be like this. It was a quote from, so Tozer died, and then his widow, remarried. And it was a quote from his widow, And basically she said, hey, my new husband, he loves me. And he says, and Tozer, I don't remember what the A stands for, but right, her first husband, she said, loved God. And this new husband, he loves me. Huh. And like that dichotomy put in such a stark language by Tozer's wife.
Right.
And I'm sure there's more to the story, and there's probably more to the full quote and conversation that I'm missing. But in the plainest terms, our wives should not feel like they're a competitor to our love for God, and that somehow our love for, like, they're put on the altar, or in our like sacrifice for ministry, for the church, or even our prayer life. Like, right. Like these, like, God doesn't give obligations and responsibilities. There may be there's tensions in what he entrusts us in our stewardship, but there's not opposing things. Like, if you want to obey God and loving your wife, you have to disobey him over here. Right. Or you want to really serve in ministry, well, you're going to, of course, neglect your wife and kids. Like, no. Right. That's sin. That's a sinful dichotomy. There's something wrong with your view of the world and your model of ministry if that's how you have to, like, you're playing these enemies that they're supposed to be friends.
Right. Yeah, I was recently reading something called the Didache, which is a very old Christian document. It's probably from the end of the first century. It may
of course you were too.
Parts of the New Testament. I was reading it, and it's talking about in Greek.
Good.
Talking about how church services worked, and this is what we do, and then we do this, and we do this in the church service. And I was really struck. I've read it before, but I never noticed this. When it's talking about the communion liturgy or the Eucharist liturgy, it says, and then we pray. And we thank God for giving us the things of this world to enjoy as we prepare to come and feed upon Christ in the bread and the wine. And you see that carried forward traditionally in the Christian liturgy. Communion or the Eucharist liturgy begins with a prayer of thanksgiving for God as a creator of giving us the things of this world. And so you might initially think, a sacrament is something ultra, super duper spiritual. We can never be more far removed from the real world than we are here at the center of the church service. But actually, the sacraments remind us that God loves his creation and has sent his son to die to save it. Mm-hmm. And he uses the elements of creation. And of course, different Christians have very different ways of understanding how this relationship works in the liturgy. But they all agree that God is using physical creaturely realities of bread and wine to draw us closer to Christ and into Christ, and this wonderful union of those things. But yeah, it really struck me, and it's kind of silly. It's so simple, but like, God gave us the world to enjoy and to be grateful for it, and that also extends to money, with all of its dangers and all of its pitfalls, which yes, we do need to be careful about, and many people get in trouble over it. But it gives you there's this freedom in Christianity to accept the world on its own terms. I was thinking recently about how Tolkien frames the Shire and the hobbits. And you might look at them in some ways and think they're really silly and stupid. Saruman, has no patience for the hobbits and thinks that they could just be wiped out and taken over and used and abused. But the wizards and the rangers are protecting the Shire because this little realm where people just enjoy simple things, plants and beer and tobacco, it's good for its own sake. And there's
and
something
love,
I think that,
and childbearing and
right, yeah, and that it's like, it's good to be a creature, and it's okay to be a creature, and we're not trying to graduate beyond our creaturely limits to some ultra super duper spiritual plane where we no longer care about pleasure or joy. It's like, no, God loves his creation and is restoring it.
Yeah. That's the biggest tragedy of the movies is the removal of the final chapters, the scouring of the Shire, which is so significant because it's taking, here's the cosmic victory of Christ over Satan, sin, and death, accomplished by bringing the ring to Mount Doom and vanquishing the demonic power trying to destroy the universe. And then to realize that great act of salvation still has to get worked out in the everyday, mundane pieces of life. and that the henchmen of Saruman and those smaller enemies still existed in your hometown and in your home and in your heart. And you had to take the victory that was hard-earned cosmically by Christ and apply that sanctification and that victory and that atonement in the simple of, okay, no, we're gonna come back and we're gonna see put to rights the scouring of the Shire and bring it back to that simple mundane rhythm of as Paul talks about, let us like live our lives peacefully, minding our own business, like that.
Right.
It had to get restored still.
Yeah. C.S. Lewis says somewhere that every job out there, every vocation that typically the husband goes out to carry out in the world, all of it exists for the sake of the mother at home raising her children. Mm-hmm. This very mundane. It's all about just being happy at home at the end of the day. And it's like, it's so simple, but it's so wonderful and it's so beautiful. Tolkien also said, I just was reading one of his letters, someone asked him, what is Lord of the Rings about? And he said, well, it's really about death and immortality. Because you don't just have the restoration of the Shire at the end, you have Frodo going off into the west to Valinor, to heaven of some sort. Typically, Christians set earth and heaven, this world and the world to come, off against each other, and they can be viewed as competitors. If you're living in this world, you must not be living for the next world, or vice versa. When I was in college and I first sensed a call into ministry, I thought it was into missions. And I, at the time, had this really strong kind of, Jesus is coming back at any moment. Nothing matters. You just have to go out into the missions field. You just have to go tell people about Jesus because he's about to come back and final judgment is coming. I still believe that Jesus is coming back. He could come back at any time. I still believe that final judgment is coming and people are going to hell and we should be concerned to tell people about him. But I've become less frantic and less anxious to be only doing spiritual stuff all the time. Bitcoin and thinking about money and long-term generational thinking is something that you start thinking much more into the future. How does that work in terms of missions and kingdom work and evangelism that oftentimes, especially in evangelicalism, has been framed as something you just have to get out there and do? Don't worry about, what's going to happen in 5 years, 10 years. That's not very spiritual. How do we square long-term, multi-generational thinking, low time preference life with living for God and living for the kingdom?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. I maybe you know this. I wonder what Tolkien's eschatology is, because Lord of the Rings kind of has a post-millennial bent in the sense that, things are restored. You're back to the beginning of the story, life in the mundane in the Shire. But there's an appendix, right? And you read through the appendix, and it's like, here are the generations of the kings that lived afterwards. And you realize that the return of the king, he comes and has his reign. And you hear about that reign, but then he passes away. And new kings come up. And you almost go into this kind of First Kings, Second Kings, Chronicles kind of story of the generations that are still under this new reign. There's still the enemy was vanquished, but life still goes on in this new millennium or new kind of era of, which age is it? The fourth age or?
The third age is when you have the War of the Rings.
So then is it moving into the fourth age?
Moving into the fourth age, yeah.
Yeah. So this fourth age is like this kind of kingdom on earth. But either way, I think to your question, having an optimism. So I've never been like a dispensational, don't carve or don't polish the brass on a sinking ship type of just preach and get ready for the rapture. And but I think there's also extremes on the postmillennial kind of kingdom on earth building, where all your attention is we're gonna gather a bunch of assets and a bunch of influence over society or culture or politics. So I don't feel like I have the right balance or tension. I see the polar errors, and I'm like, we're all shooting for somewhere that's the right balance. But the way you know how balanced you are is, well, who's on the left of you and who's on the right of you when it comes to this optimism or pessimism and cultural engagement. But either way, I would say if you can't kind of resolve with Jonathan Edwards, where he says, like, resolved to pursue, and I'm going to misquote this, but pursue the absolute deepest satisfaction and happiness in the next life as possible. Like, if that isn't your foundational resolution in life to pursue eternal pleasure and rewards because your life had an impact for eternity, okay, your priorities are wrong.
Right.
Now, Edwards was a postmillennialist. Like, he had an optimistic view of revival and God's kingdom working in this earth. So he wasn't like how he applied that resolution wasn't, I just only do these spiritual kind of churchy things. But so I would say have that foundational resolution, and then say, and if he tarries, we're building for 1,000 years here.
Right.
Like, and whatever millennial eschatology is right, I'm building for the kingdom here.
Right.
In the sense of I want to see my great grandkids. And Edwards did this. He prayed daily for, 7 generations, he's thinking generationally, and you could see even the genealogies of Edwards,
right,
where you're like, how much kingdom influence came from generations, or 4 generations from this one man's faithfulness.
Right.
And I think he was in a line of faithful ministers of the gospel, but still, like, think like that. Have Edwards' heavenly mindedness and Edwards' pray to the 7th generation for your family's earthly legacy.
Right. All right. And whatever comes and whatever things go sideways, you trust God to deal with it, and you do your best to deal with the cards you've been dealt.
Yeah.
There's a great part in Lord of the Rings right after Gandalf appears to have died in the mines of Moria, and they come out the other side of the mountains. And I think it's Gimli, and he's saying, well, what the heck? Gandalf was our leader. He's the one who led us through here. His vision failed him. He was wrong about the future. Everything has gone to pot. And Aragorn says something to him along the lines of, and this shows up a few times in the books, that it's not that his vision failed him, it's that great things are worth attempting, even if you don't know the way forward, and even if the way ends in death and in darkness, you still should be working to do what's right and what's noble and what's good.
Yeah.
And this, because I think Christian history, world history should sober us and temper us in terms of just expecting things to be one big giant slope upward with no hiccups, no backslidings. A lot of bad things can go sideways, and humans are notoriously bad about predicting the future. They're notoriously good at messing up things and things going sideways. But you keep going, and you trust the Lord, and you live for Him. And I love what you said about living and behaving as if you're going to be around for another 1,000 years, or as if the church is going to be here for another 1,000 years, even though, Jesus could come back today. And I think living with that long-term mindset and doing ministry with that long-term mindset is in many ways what Jesus means when he says, be ready for me to come back. Yeah. If he comes back and you're living like that, you're ready.
Yeah. And one quick illustration of this, of how this applies. It applies to our architecture and how we build buildings. Right. Okay. So the church that I was involved in that we ended up closing, came out of like a Bible church dispensational theology.
Just build the cheapest thing you can because it doesn't
literally
matter.
And it was the founder was a big radio personality. It was, I think, the largest church in like the 50s and 60s. It was the largest, most influential church in our city. And it's literally one cinder block box, and it was built with as cheap as possible and as large as possible to get the most people in the room so we can preach the gospel to them.
Right.
Okay, so that was the vision. It was built like that, and from what I hear, the founder and that preacher guy said, well, yeah. And then if it fails, it can be like a warehouse, like an industrial warehouse, right? Because it's the ugliest thing you ever seen: cinder block box, flat roof, everything. But so fast forward, like 60, 70 years, the building's like end of life, deferred maintenance in the like 5 to 10 million plus range.
Right.
And it just was not built to hand it on to the next generation. It was built to get as much people in the kingdom before the rapture and before the end times. And then you compare that to some of these other like downtown churches. My church, or my city, I think of this Hinson Baptist or some other well-known historical buildings. Not all have stayed faithful, right? So you have to both keep faithful to the gospel and see that the church buildings stay in the kingdom. But if the church reigns faithful and you build the building for generations and you take the time, and it's like, well, this building took like 25 years to build. And it was the whole congregation, and they worked at it for like literally almost like a generation was the building of the building.
Right.
Oh, but it's here 150 years later. Well, you know what? That's worth it. So let's build things in this life that are still going to be here.
Right.
Even if it means, hey, he spent half his life doing that. If it's going to bear fruit for our grandkids, it's worth it.
That's great. Well, any parting words of how people can find you, what you're up to, anything you're excited about right now that Brilliance Labs is doing that you want to tell people about?
Yeah, well, brilliancelabs.org is our website. brilliancelabs.org/Bitcoin is our particular focus on Bitcoin ventures. And yeah, we're just trying to help Christians and Christian orgs, mission orgs and churches figure out how to leverage it for the kingdom. We have a lot of free resources that we give away. I've done a lot of trainings like virtually or come in and done consulting for leadership teams to think through specific issues, specific countries, how to use Bitcoin.
And sometimes you've gone into countries and done some workshops with them.
Yeah. So we have a training coming up in India in late October. Where we bring missions people and Bitcoiners together. We spent some time in El Salvador. We went to Kenya. And so, yeah, I would love to talk to anyone that overlaps with these very quirky niche interests, but which we think
are for the kingdom.
Are for the kingdom are going to have a big impact.
Great. Well, thanks, Ahshuwah. Glad you could join us today.
Thank you, Tim.